Okay, well, welcome back, Kodiak. Coffee break's over. Those of you visiting over there, come on and sit on down. Well, and thank you. Well, once again, welcome to Comfish 2022. It's really nice to be back together in person. We'd like to start off by thanking our sponsors this morning, Highmark Marine Fabrication and North Rim Bank. We appreciate your contributions. As many of you know, this year we are doing our forums in a hybrid manner. For those of you joining us virtually, welcome, thank you. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a short question and answer session. And for those online, please send us your questions via the Q&A chat box, and we'll gather your questions along with those in the room. So next we're going to hear from a statewide update from the State of Alaska Fish and Game Commissioner, Doug Vincent Lang. Doug Vincent Lang spent 34 years in public service at the Alaska Department of Fish and Game before accepting the position of commissioner in January 2019. A scientist with a focus on fulfilling the department's mission, Vincent Lang began work at the department as a fisheries research and management biologist for the Division of Sport in 1981. During his tenure at the Division of Sport Fish, Vincent Lang worked on a number of high-level research and policy issues for the state. He was instrumental in integrating planning into the management of Alaska's recreational fisheries by leading an effort to develop and implement the first ever strategic plan for the Division of Sport Fish. In 2012, he was named director of the Division of Wildlife, where he managed Alaska's wildlife under the sustained yield principles and public trust doctrine principles. He has represented the state of Alaska on a wide range of policy issues, including climate change, Arctic, and marine policy issues. Vincent Lang lives in Anchorage with his wife of 35 years. He has 3 children and is now teaching his granddaughter to hunt, fish, and enjoy Alaska's outdoors. Thank you, Commissioner. Come on up.
Hi, everyone. Well, good morning, and really thank you for the opportunity to join your gathering today to discuss Alaska's fisheries. It's great to be in person again and interact with the many faces of our fisheries. Before I begin, I want to take some opportunity to thank everyone involved in Alaska's fisheries, from the fishermen to the tenders, to the processors, to the transporters, to the distributors, and to the marketers for all you do to contribute to our fisheries and our state's economy. We at the department are focused on managing our state's fisheries resources for sustainability and to optimize public use, but it is you all that turn this into benefits for our states. Thank you all for all you do for Alaska. So rather than spend 30 minutes going through the outlook for this year's upcoming fisheries, let me instead kind of ramble on about a couple of focal areas, from COVID through mariculture and bycatch, food security, the Arctic, Alaska Peninsula fisheries, disasters, and Bristol Bay. So let's start with COVID. Simply put, I think we can all say we're pretty tired of living with this virus. It is becoming more of a reality that we are learning to live with the virus and getting on with our lives. Early on, COVID threatened fisheries across our state. Alaska had a choice to make: let the virus substantially reduce our fisheries, or find a way to keep our fisheries open by mitigating the impacts. We chose the latter, and a lot of our fisheries actually conducted the last 2 years. I'm proud of the way fishermen, processors, communities, healthcare workers, and department staff worked together to find a way that allowed our fisheries to continue to operate and to do so safely and contribute to our state's economy. Thank you all for your efforts. Please take time also to thank department staff. They put in place all the required research and management infrastructure to ensure that we could have fisheries across our state. They did this despite unknown personal risks that they faced. And all of our area offices remained open. This is in stark contrast to other entities whose offices were closed, many of which remain closed today. So yes, COVID is still out there, but I'm confident we will be able to conduct our fisheries into the future despite it. Let's switch a little bit to changing ocean conditions and how it's impacting our fisheries. I think we can all agree that changing oceanographic conditions are having an impact on our fish and game resources and our fisheries. warm water blobs, acidification, changing zooplankton, increased populations of marine mammals and salmon sharks, leading to increased predation in the ocean. The list seems to grow almost daily. In the past, ADF&G has primarily focused its efforts towards sustainable management on ensuring adequate escapements and spawning biomasses. This largely worked as the ocean was relatively stable. However, it has become evident that the ocean is changing and becoming more variable, and that these changes are differentially impacting our fishery resources. Our management needs to adapt. As such, the department has expanded its exploration of what is happening in the ocean and how it's impacting our management. As you all know, the ocean is big and vast. Given this, we know we cannot begin to solve these puzzles pieces alone. It requires partnerships. Towards this end, we are engaging at the international level to begin to unravel the questions about a changing oceanographic conditions. This past year, we contributed $500,000 through the Pacific Salmon Treaty and through the North Pacific Research Board, efforts underway by the International Year of the Salmon. This is an international partnership to develop a better understanding of the factors driving salmon abundance and the challenges facing them, to encourage scientists and decision makers and the public to work towards solutions that address threats and challenges to salmon and support conservation and restoration strategies to help manage salmon in the face of climate change. We have also refocused staff to participate on the NOAA cruises that are part of this effort. We have, I think, 2 or 3 staff members right now on a NOAA vessel conducting the Eastern Gulf of Alaska surveys as part of the International Year of the International Year of Salmon. These efforts are critical towards understanding what is happening in the ocean. And although we are not cooperating right now with Russian research activities because of what's going on with Ukraine, the Russians are still doing their research parts in the Western Gulf. I mean, in the Western Gulf and the Bering Sea. And we just pulled the two brave Alaskans who are going to go out in that research cruise, and they're not on it, but the research vessel activity is still going on. We're also leading our efforts to better understand how nearshore marine environments are impacting salmon and their survival. We have dedicated one of our scientists to lead our marine science efforts, Dr. Katie Howard. Her efforts in cooperation with NOAA are leading to a better understanding of how nearshore marine conditions are impacting Chinook salmon and chum salmon survival in the northern Bering Sea. I think we all know that we've seen a relatively run collapse of chum salmon in the Yukon River. I think we're starting to understand that the importance of the nearshore marine environment in that first month and a half is critical towards assessing what's going to happen in terms of returns in future years. We have similar work underway in Southeast Alaska with pink salmon. We have a supplemental capital request in to expand this work in the southern Bering Sea and in the North Gulf of Alaska. We are hopeful this will be approved by the legislature this session. We all know Bering Sea crab stocks have significantly declined in recent years. We do not understand the reasons for the decline, but suspect that they are related to changing marine conditions affecting the survival of crab larvae. Early life history research is in development to help better understand recruitment bottlenecks for the depressed Bering Sea crab stocks. We're also working with our federal partners to ensure that we have the necessary ship time to conduct at-sea research. It was very comforting to know that the federal budget through Senator Murkowski and Don Young and Senator Sullivan is going to dedicate additional sea research time for NOAA vessels in Alaska. Simply put, we cannot model our way out of this problem. We lost a year of survey, and I think we got surprised at what we found out in terms of crab stocks. We got to be out at sea on those NOAA vessels. Also, the largest satellite tagging effort to date for Bering Sea crab is happening right now. This project is a collaborative effort amongst ADF&G, NOAA, and BSF-RF. A total of 330 satellite tags were deployed in October 2021 on legal male and mature female red king crab to better understand seasonal movement patterns and spring spawning locations. This is critical work that we need to undertake. Preliminary results should be available the summer of 2022. This all said, we have taken the necessary steps to ensure sustainability of the resource. While painful, we must curtail harvest now to ensure these stocks can rebuild. We have also forwarded to the Secretary of Commerce a request for her to declare a disaster for these fisheries. That's in and it's sitting in the Secretary's hands right now. Talking of disasters, the department has received many disaster requests for numerous fisheries across Alaska. With the exception of one, we have finished all of our analysis for all of these and have forwarded the analyses on to the Secretary of Commerce for her consideration. That said, the process is not a speedy process, and there is currently limited federal funding available for new disaster declarations. So we are working with our congressional delegation, ensuring that there is adequate funding for any disasters that she declares. I also want to note that disasters are not quick fixes. I know there's a lot of frustration on the length of time it takes to get money out the door. But in short, the system is not fast. And we are working with the congressional delegation on ways to speed it up. It is also slowed by the development of spend plans. While slows the process a bit, allows necessary public input into the development of spend plans, something I feel is critical. Otherwise, if it doesn't happen that way, it happens by me doing it with my staff. And it's critical that these disasters have the people that are actually feeling the pain involved in the decision-making of how the disaster spend plan is developed. I would also like to briefly talk about mariculture. The governor and the department support development of a viable mariculture industry. We are dedicating resources to grow this industry. Recently I'm a Exxon Valdez oil spill trustee. We dedicated almost $25 to $30 million of remaining trustee resources to develop the mariculture industry across Alaska. Sam Raybung, our commercial fisheries director, has worked closely with the mariculture task force and is continuing our efforts to grow this industry. As part of this, we have worked to ensure that we could obtain reasonable permits for mariculture operations around marine mammals. We see this industry as a new and growing foundational piece of the economy of the state, especially in coastal communities such as Kodiak. Bycatch is another topic that has recently garnered a lot of public support, interest, and inquiry, particularly in light of the very poor chum returns to Western Alaska. The governor has established a bycatch task force to examine this issue and make recommendations on the management of this controversial topic. The task force has met 3 times already. 4 committees have been formed, including one on Western Alaska salmon, one on Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska crab, one on Gulf of Alaska halibut and salmon, and one on science, technology, and innovation. These committees will be meeting over the next 2 to 3 months. I encourage you all to become engaged with the task force and with the various committees that have been formed. Information on how to participate can be found on our website. Let's spend a few moments now on food security. I think if we learned anything from COVID, it is how vulnerable our state is to disruptions in food supply. Food shelves across our state were bare and supplies were in short supply. This was especially true across rural Alaska. Alaskans became aware of how dependent we are on food deliveries. In essence, we have less than a week's supply of some food items, especially perishable items. Without resupply, shortages did occur and could occur into the future. So why am I talking about this? Well, our state's fish and game resources are an important element of our food security. Our subsistence, personal use, sport fisheries all provide opportunities to place fish and game resources on the tables and freezers of Alaskans. Alaskans also access these resources by purchasing commercially harvested Alaskan seafood products. Last week, I saw direct marketing of cod fillets in the Safeway store I shopped at. Also, in most coastal communities, one can direct purchase seafoods at the docks. We need to explore more options for making Alaskan commercially caught salmon available throughout our state. This has resulted in an increased awareness surrounding the issue of food security across our state. In response, the Governor Dunleavy has issued an administrative order establishing a food security task force to evaluate this issue and make recommendations regarding how best to increase our state's food security. We are actively seeking members on this task force, and if you're interested in serving, please apply through the Office of Boards and Commissions in the Governor's office. The Alaska Legislature is also considering establishing a task force to address this issue. Now let's switch to the Arctic. Yes, with a changing climate, the Arctic is opening, and other Arctic and non-Arctic entities are exploring opportunities that are emerging. As a state, we cannot be left behind. As the Arctic opens, we must examine the potential to develop responsible and sustainable fisheries and maintain access to the fisheries we already have as other countries encroach. We must begin now to develop and conduct research needed to define the extent of the fishery resources. This information is needed to develop management plans to ensure fisheries are sustainably managed. Included in these plans is the need for consideration of community development quotas to ensure our Arctic communities have a stake in a way of developing fisheries. I have assigned Ms. Danny Evanson to lead our efforts to examine research to inform decisions regarding emerging opportunities. The department has a supplemental budget capital request in play to begin this effort. This will require cooperation with the North Pacific Fishery Management Council and other entities such as the North Slope Borough. Speaking of the council, it has recently completed work on linking bycatch limits to halibut to the abundance of halibut in the Bering Sea. This was a very controversial effort, but one the state supported. The council also completed a rationalization program for Bering Sea cod fisheries. And as part of this effort, the state supported granting quota shares to processors who have invested in Alaska, recognizing their role in the seafood industry. We're also examining the issue of observer coverage and how we can ensure we have comprehensive yet observer coverage throughout both the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. As the next steps, we are discussing with impacted users and communities about whether it is time to initiate analysis of rationalizing the Gulf of Alaska cod fisheries. If you have comments or suggestions, please feel free to contact us. Before we begin this effort, we need concurrence on a problem statement and a range of alternatives for analyses. Let's briefly talk about Bristol Bay. We are in a 7-year period with annual returns of over 50 million sockeye salmon. 50 million sockeye salmon. The most recent 5-year average harvest of 42 million sockeye. The 2022 forecast is for a run of about 75 million fish, which realized will be the largest on record. Harvest in 2022 is likely to approach 50 million fish. This has been the most productive era in the Bristol Bay fishery since statehood. As a matter of fact, we may reach our daily processing capacity and leave fish unharvested simply because we have so many fish returning. I want to take the opportunity at this opportunity to thank the processing sector for their investment in our state. They are a critical link between our fishermen and the markets. I look forward to working with this sector to stabilize their industries and to look for ways to allow more creative product development and increases in value. Speaking in marketing, the partnership with ASME and other groups to market our fish is working. I attended the Symphony of Seafood and was amazed by the wide range of products being developed to market our seafood. I also saw in my recent visit to the grocery store that a freezer section was dedicated to Alaskan seafood, including cod, pollock, salmon, and scallops. We need to build upon this and find further ways to increase our in-state product development to capture more of the revenues and jobs associated with processing as an alternative to sending our seafood products overseas. Let's briefly talk about Alaska Peninsula salmon fisheries. These are traditional salmon fisheries that harvest mixed stocks, including those returning to Chinook and various AYK drainages, some of which are currently not meeting escapement goals. As such, the management of these fisheries is under review, especially those that occur during June and early July. The Board of Fish is taking up an ACR next week to explore the issue of the emerging issue of Chinook sockeye harvest in these fisheries. And next year, the board will be more comprehensively reviewing these as part of the normal cycle. Much of what we know about these fisheries is from the Wassup Study, which is now over a decade old. This year, we have initiated a new genetic study to update the Wassup analysis for the June salmon fishery, which was when the Western Alaska chum were observed in the catch. We have an FY22 supplemental budget request in to support this work. We need information to update and validate the Wassup studies. Last, let me touch on the graying of the fleet. I was encouraged by the number of young fishermen that I've met as I've been Commissioner of Fish and Game. That said, we must find ways to incentivize entry into our fisheries, from training to financing to marketing. Fisheries take fishermen, and we must not lose our focus on the recruitment of new fishermen into our fisheries. In closing, I again want to thank you all for your involvement and support, and thank you again for your time this morning. And I'm open for any discussions and questions you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's good. Commissioner, I appreciate that. So it looks like we have our first question up from Julie.
All right, Julie.
So I want, what? The short people here. I wanted to clarify one of the things that you said during your statement, which was you were considering rationalizing the Gulf cod fishery. So you're talking fixed gear and trawl?
Yeah, we're talking about whether it's time to open up that discussion. We tackled the Bering Sea cod rationalization right off the bat last year. So when we started this 4 years ago, we chose not to tackle the Gulf of Alaska and give people time to have an opportunity to discuss what that would look like in terms of a problem statement and a range of alternatives that we could get concurrence around. So now is the time, since we've tackled that last issue, we have council time that we could start tackling the Gulf of Alaska.
But just clarifying, then when you're talking about that, you're talking about all gear types and not just trawl for rationalization in the Gulf.
Whatever we can get concurrence on tackling would be the approach that we would want to take.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And again, part of the reason we're very interested in this is, we've seen significant reductions in bycatch with rationalized fisheries. We understand they're very controversial and the issues in the Gulf are different than the issues in the Bering Sea. But we would like to have a discussion of how we can best deal with bycatch in the Gulf of Alaska. Duncan.
Thanks, Commissioner. Lots of topics, and I appreciate the variety of the things that you have on your plate. One of the things you didn't mention that you and I have talked about from time to time that I'd like you to address is what happened back in 97, 98, when sea lions were declared endangered. And we developed reasonable and prudent alternatives. And National Marine Fisheries Service came to the state of Alaska and requested that the state close down approximately 100 haul out and rookeries in state waters as part of that process. You'll remember that the Board of Fish at that time indicated that they weren't required to or forced to make those closures. And in fact, Cape Barnabas here in Kodiak and an area outside of Sandpoint was not closed despite National Marine Fisheries Service request to do so. We're now 20 plus years past that process. Would the state of Alaska consider revisiting whether or not it remains appropriate for all of those haul out and rookeries to be closed based on dated, from my perspective at least, dated sea lion information relative to abundance here in the central Gulf of Alaska?
Oh, yeah, certainly. We support any kind of review based on new information. But I can tell you that one of the clearest and most present dangers I see to fisheries across Alaska is Protected Resources and Endangered Species Act. We are seeing vast designations of critical habitat across our state, where the sea lion one was built on very discrete small areas around important haul outs. The newest ones that we're seeing for whales and ice seals and other marine mammals is basically any place they occupy in the ocean. And we were led to believe that was okay because any small change or alteration of habitat would be considered de minimis or not significant. In fact, what we're seeing is the same level of review is going on no matter how small the impact. So I've written a letter to the Secretary of Commerce asking for a review of how critical habitat is being designated in Alaska in comparison to other regions of America, the lower 48, especially you take the North Pacific right whale, for instance. There's a designation that's going to be very large and expansive if they have their way. But in the East Coast with the North Atlantic right whale, it's very discrete small areas. So either treat us the same as the East Coast of the United States or go back and revisit them and have them treated like Alaska. So yeah, I think it'd be appropriate to have that review.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole sphere is of great concern and I appreciate you amplifying that. But I would certainly, with regard to impacts here in Kodiak and changing population dynamics in the central Gulf, I appreciate the Western Gulf and the Aleutians just still got some sea lion issues. But it's time. And I would just encourage you, as you have opportunity with staff, to revisit that. Next question, Doug. Yesterday at the Board of Fish, we had a presentation relative to research about Chinook salmon, particularly from the Yukon River. And as you have mentioned publicly before, the critical phase of that is in the first year of life. It's the best indicator of what you're going to see coming back. That's important when you're thinking about the impacts of bycatch in the Bering Sea. I understand there's a supplemental appropriation relative to additional work or additional focus on that first year of life. I'd like you to just amplify that because I found that of real interest and sort of a critical component, informational component, as we think about the bycatch issues in the Bering Sea.
Yeah, well, there's two areas that we're interested in looking at in the ocean. One is that first month and a half out at sea, and from Dr. Katie Howard's work and Noah's work up in the North Bering Sea, we're seeing that near shore environment can be used to predict what's coming back 2 to 3 years into the future. So we're finding out that that's a critically important variable in terms of how that condition changes in terms of the survival of salmon coming back to streams, even when despite how many we put out. The second one is, and we have a supplemental request, as you said, in play to expand that work into the southern Bering Sea and in the North Gulf of Alaska, because we really don't have any coverage there. We're doing a little bit of that work in southeast Alaska with pink salmon under that past pink salmon disaster relief. The other piece is what's happening in the ocean. And it's pretty clear to me that as we look at it, as the ocean warms, salmon are cold-blooded, their energy demands go up. We know as the ocean warms, zooplankton composition changes to something that is less nutritious to salmon. And it's pretty clear to me that salmon are kind of losing that competitive, battle out in the ocean. Cod are doing well. You look at cod, they also like to eat crab larvae. So sablefish like to eat crab larvae. So we have a lot to understand out in the ocean, and we got to start piecing that puzzle together. We got to start dedicating resources to it.
And then don't want to monopolize, but just really quickly, I understand the Wassup interest and the need to update that. But there's a component of that study that's west of Wassup that has information that we would like to have disclosed because we believe that's important for our fisheries. We've experienced salmon fishery closures. The Cape Igvac fisheries, was modified. We've had closures relative to the North Shalikoff for now over 30 years, but we don't really have good information. It's all Board of Fish regulation based on supposition. Could you or would you be willing to release the data in the Wassup study that's designated west of Wassup? And then B, would you support a Wassup type study for Chignik, Kodiak, Cook Inlet, and Prince William Sound? It seems as though Aleutians, Western Alaska, lots of issues, Wassup study, Central Gulf, speculation, no investment. What are your thoughts?
Let me check on the data question, because I'm not, there's an old agreement that was before my time as to what happened with sharing of information of that Wassup study. And I know it's still somewhat binding, so I got to check on the answer to that one. Certainly, we support things that require updated information to make the best information in front of the board. And short of that, the board will make decisions that are necessary with a precautionary principle, which has resulted in closures. So, right now, we know that a lot has changed over 10 years since Wassup was done. Still remains the best available science that we have. But that said, we should be looking at ways to update that and hope potentially improve the information that's in front of the board to make decisions. Because we know a lot has changed in the ocean since the Wassup study has been conducted.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah. So what's KSR stand for?
KSA, Kodiak Seiners
Okay.
Association.
Okay. I saw the R. I thought it was
Yeah,
an R.
we have a salmon fishery here
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
So I would normally talk about that. I would normally talk about salmon, but I'm a little bit disturbed by your comments about the rationalization of the groundfish fishery here.
I haven't said we were doing it. I said it's time to open that discussion up. So
Yeah, so, but in the same breath that you described opening that up, you also said you're concerned about the graying of the fleet. And what we've seen with, particularly in that Bering Sea program that you just implemented, there was no mechanism to allow new access to it. It was basically a giveaway of resources that will ultimately result in Seattle and large interest control of the fishery. Here, you've got a small boat active fleet. You got a fleet of fishermen who are fiercely defensive of the right to be able to transition between fisheries and access multiple fisheries, multiple gear types. That has not been a component of any rationalized fishery that I've seen. And it's been one of the greatest impediments of keeping new fishermen coming into the fleet to rejuvenating it. And so I want to know, one, do you recognize how difficult it is for an independent fisherman who isn't given quota or whose family doesn't have quota to access those fisheries? And two, if so, in this discussion that should be centered here in Kodiak, not up in Anchorage, what have you done to discuss how to make sure that our fisheries remain accessible to everybody in the future and don't just migrate away to Seattle like the other ones?
well, there's a whole bunch in there. So certainly we encourage the the local voice in fisheries to come forward. That's why we did not tackle Gulf rationalization as the first round when we came into office 4 years ago. So I actually came down, I think Kodiak, and told people, start working on what you see as a problem statement, because clearly it's not beneficial to the resource or anything else when you have a race to fish and there's no limitations on bycatch. You can do it through other ways, but that's one of the most proven ways to deal with the issue. So again, we have not even consolidated around what a problem statement would be, nor acceptable range of alternatives. And built into the range of alternatives might be the very issues that you've talked about, and they should be a part of the range of alternatives. So yeah, get engaged.
Why was that omitted from the Bering Sea program? Why wasn't that a part of the discussion there? And I know they're different. They don't have an active fishing community. They don't have a local processing community.
Yeah.
But why didn't you start there with trying to find ideas to be able to recruit new entrants into that fishery as well?
We did not hear that as a significant issue in that fishery as it got developed. In the Gulf, it's a lot more loud. And I think that's one of the reasons we didn't tackle it early on. We want that voice to be heard.
Thank you.
So I encourage you, get engaged.
Lots of ideas.
Oh, yeah, it's great. These aren't my fisheries, they're your fisheries, so.
So Commissioner Doug Vincent Lang, my name's Alexis Squatchka. I'm one of those guys that did get involved.
That what?
Did get involved. I
Okay.
spent 20 years of my life, 9 of them on the observer panel for North Pacific Fishery Management Council. And it's a process that's wears you down, and the little guy does not rise to the top. It's about economics and money. And the Bering Sea is a completely different animal than the Gulf. And I'm not yay or nay on rationalization. I'm just saying that the state of Alaska has got to get what you do in the Gulf right. And when you're talking about ideas, the 3 mile line is a huge deal for the state of Alaska and the Gulf here, because it's not compatible with what you do outside of 3 miles. And a lot of those fish don't pay attention to that 3 mile line. And so I think that before you go down any road, you really decide what you're going to do with state waters versus federal waters, and how those fish that are want to be caught from the federal fishery inside of 3, and are you going to relinquish control of those? I mean, there's a lot of questions there that have not been sauced out that need to be sauced out. So I encourage you to do that. And then Darren, I was a halibut fisherman, and I worked for somebody who had a bunch of quota, and that job went away, and I no longer can access halibut. I just can't pencil it out to make it work for me. And you cannot be in a vacuum of one fishery and make a living in this community. And that goes for all of us. If pollock fails and cod and all those things fail, then you have to have somewhere to go. And as the ocean's changing, it's getting more and more exacerbated. So I encourage you to come up with a plan, what you're going to do with state waters and how that works.
So yeah, I think those are all very valid points. So I guess I throw back at you guys, what's the alternative? Status quo? And that we can continue with status quo, but that's going to have increased as participation increases. We're going to have shorter and shorter seasons, which creates a race for fish, which is not in the best long-term economic interest of either fishermen or the markets that they deliver out to. So, I think it's time, even though there are a lot of issues associated with getting the issue on the table and having a discussion. We as a state have not, let me be clear, we have not flushed this out. We are waiting for people in the local area to start flushing it out. But if we don't go down that path and at least have that discussion, status quo becomes the norm. We're probably going to end up with more and more observer coverage on vessels. We're going to end up with hard bycatch limits, caps, which are going to shut fisheries down, which is the alternative to moving with not having the discussion of a rationalization program.
So to kind of respond to that a little bit, and this isn't a tit for tat, I'd like to point out that here in this community, the last 2 years, there's been a voluntary catch program with pollock, which is basically a rationalized fishery. Right. And and anyway, there's been a voluntary.
And a co-op fishery might be the alternative.
And then also there has not been a directed trawl portion of that. It's been MRA only. So I'm like, we've got very little cod that we're working on and pollocks all over the board. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. I just like to point out that there are things being done. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. But as long as we keep that fish fluid in this community where you can and cannot access it, it'll be better for adapting to whatever changes. Once you rationalize, you fix it forever.
And maybe the co-op fishery is the way to go.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
My name's Jake Everett. I'm owner operator of, it's the smallest trawler in the fleet right now, but we're getting ready to head south and spend a couple $1,000,000 to make it bigger. And quite frankly, I arrived here from Rhode Island because of rationalization. There was absolutely zero future for me to own a business or ever operate a boat profitably. I agree. I mean, there's issues in the fishery here. I think the voluntary catch share has been working. They've helped us solve some bycatch issues, but again, I would really encourage you to listen to all the voices in this equation if you're going to revisit the discussion, and it's not an antagonistic perspective on my part. I think we can reach a solution that'll work for everybody, but yeah, quite frankly, adamantly opposed to any processor shares. They've done virtually zero to raise the value of pollock over the last 10 years for me. So I don't understand why they should get 20% of my history that I worked for. But other than that, yeah, I think there's different alternatives that we can come to. You finished your speech in closing with the graying of the fleet. As Darren and some others have stated, rationalization is almost a direct antithesis to that, at least in the traditional embodiment of those regulatory regimes. I mean, once you raise the barrier to entry to a fishery, of course, there's going to be no new entrants. They got to buy a $2-3 million boat and then $3-4 million a quota just to make it work. It's impossible. If you want the fishery to look like Trident and Icicle owning every single boat, then yeah, go that way. But I think Kodiak's a very unique port compared to the Bering Sea. A lot of independent small businesses, really important. I'm on the board of Alaska Whitefish Trawlers, represent, I think it's 20 or so independent vessels, home ported in Kodiak, family businesses. So definitely encourage you to listen to our voice. So thanks.
Yeah, it'd be time to come down here and have a roundtable discussion someday when it's outside of the fishing season for cod. So. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name's Nate Rose. I'm a local salmon fisherman. This is my first year getting into the pot cod fishery here in town. I also jig for rockfish and for pots and participate in the tanner crab.
Did you
fishery.
catch the cod that we ate the other night?
I did not.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry about that. Anyways, I appreciate your comments on Wassup and Western Alaska salmon fisheries. I'm going to speak on salmon. Sorry to you guys that are here for groundfish, but salmon's my main source of income. And we watched during the 2020 Board of Fish meeting some significant changes to our management plan based off of a 3-year genetic study that was never designed to be used the way it was used. And I recognize that allocation issues never actually, they're never always about the numbers. A lot of times you have to take into account fish, food security and other issues. I respectfully request that before the state goes and spends a bunch more money on an additional Wassup study, which they should do anyways, that Wassup study was a snapshot in time. It was an 8-year period of time. There's unanalyzed data in there, a whole year of data for the Eastern District of Chignik. We don't know what's in there, yet you guys have the results that could be analyzed. I feel it would be prudent to do so before we just up and spend a bunch more money for something else.
So-
And reiterating what Duncan said about the east of Wassup stocks, we saw those stocks are the stocks of consideration specifically that were focused on during the 3 years of genetic study that had broad reaching implications for our fishery. And I just think it's almost a slap in the face not to look at those data first and then compare it to a new Wassup study to actually see when you're taking a genetic study as a snapshot in time. And so you take 40 years of fishing history from some of these fishermen in Kodiak, and they can tell you, yes, fish migration patterns have changed, but ultimately you're going to see them change back again. And I think that the department could do its due diligence to fully analyze the data within Wassup. You're 60% done. Do the rest.
Well, the main question that we're faced with right now that we're going to look at this summer is the chum salmon catches in the Wassup study. So you all realize we had a run failure of chums into the Yukon and Kuskokwim River. We closed subsistence fishing, and subsistence is a priority in this state. So we're looking at what that stock composition is during that latter part of June in terms of chum salmon, because we have data from 10, 15 years ago with chum salmon. The unfortunate thing is we cannot distinguish with our genetic tools, the difference between Bristol Bay chum salmon and Yukon and Kuskokwim chum salmon. But we do need to have a better understanding of what we can do from a management perspective to try to reduce our chum salmon intercept when we have subsistence fisheries closed in the Yukon and Kuskokwim River. We have a priority in this state for subsistence, and if we're closing people's livelihoods and customary and traditional practices, we need to at least look at the questions of chum salmon intercepts in those fisheries during the latter part of June, which we know from the Wassup study, they were there.
Commissioner, respectfully, I appreciate your focus on those chum salmon, but I also want to bring to light that the Board of Fish developed a mixed stock policy specifically to help guide the decisions relative to these mixed stock fisheries, or if you want to call them intercept fisheries, feel free. Those mixed stock fisheries, per board members that are currently sitting on the board, have said mixed stock fisheries, the farther you are from a stream of natal origin, the less likely you are to have a direct impact on that stock. I just think that from a latent fisherman, the department wanting to do an additional Wassup study just because of 1 year of lack of chum run is the same slap in the face that Kodiak fishermen just saw when the genetic stock identification for sockeye and Kodiak was used to allocate fish in a different manner.
I understand what your concern is, and mixed stock fishery does have allocation criteria. But when it comes to subsistence, which we're not meeting, subsistence has a priority, which is not an allocative decision. So we're going to look very closely with some information on chum salmon in that fishery to figure out what we can do to minimize our chum salmon harvest while protecting the other aspects of that fishery.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm gonna switch species again.
Okay,
Talk
cool.
about herring.
Yeah.
Okay, in the Sacro herring fishery, all of the male fish caught are considered as bycatch. A small portion of the male herring are utilized for fish meal, but well over 85% of the males combined with the female carcasses after the eggs are popped are ground up and discharged. Is there any discussion about ways to better utilize the herring resource? A herring tax credit by the Alaska legislature many years ago has not resulted in better usages. Thank you.
Yeah, so herring is an unutilized resource. We're going to have a Togiak herring quota that's largely going to go unharvested because there's no market conditions out there. So we're working with the processing sector to find a market, but a lot of that herring used to go over to Japan, and the culture has changed, the demand has changed. So this is where we need Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute to step forward and find alternative uses for halibut. For herring. Yeah, it's just, we need to find markets. We have quota, we just don't have the market for it.
Okay. One more in line here that's coming in a policy that I just wanted to briefly say the Pacific cod we ate at Fish Taco Night was caught by one of our local jig fishermen, Rob Carter,
Cool.
who utilized the entry-level opportunity in the jig fishery to stair step up. In recent years, he's bought a salmon permit. Just a couple of years ago, we bought a tanner crab permit. So the entry-level opportunity just is really key to maintaining our strength of our fishing community. So this question is coming in. Currently, the Board of Fish is made up mostly reps from the Anchorage area in the interior. How can we work to get more coastal commercial fishery representatives appointed, keeping in mind that the conflict of interest prevents most qualified applicants from putting their name in?
Well, right now, the way I talk to people about the Board of Fisheries is you can't be called to serve if you don't apply. And I know there's a lot of people that don't apply because they don't think they're going to get selected, but you can't be put into the game if you're not on the bench. So anybody that wants to serve on the Board of Fish, I encourage you to put your name in. I truly do. We are looking for people because right now there's not a lot of people that are interested in doing it. And I'm trying to work with our legislature to make sure that the confirmation process isn't as probing and as it currently is, because it's a hard process to get through between, confirmation hearings and the votes. But again, if you want to make a difference in this state's fisheries, you got to serve on these boards. And I know it's hard, but put your name in, and you can't be selected if your name's not on that list. So I encourage you to get to apply. Yeah, so Israel's not going to reserve. Israel Payton, Jared is not going to reserve. And so we have one vacant seat that's also open. So there'll be 3 vacancies that will be named sometime this spring. So get your names in if you're interested. I can't guarantee you're going to be selected, but get your names in. So.
Well, we're going straight up noon. Darren, did you have one more comment? Or we haven't?
Yeah, come on up.
Julie, and then we've got Julie Cavanagh hasn't had a chance to say anything yet. Julie, do you have a question? Question. Come on up.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Commissioner Julie Cavanagh.
Yeah.
Our family fishes in several different areas in state and federal fisheries. Number one, I think one of the barriers to serving on the Board of Fish is the conflict of interest things. I know, like if I was to be selected, I probably wouldn't be able to vote on anything other than maybe subsistence issues or something like that because of where our family fishes and stuff. So I think that's a big barrier to being able to serve on all kinds of boards and stuff.
Well, so we had John Jensen, who had to excuse himself from Southeast Alaska fisheries, but he's able to bring his expertise from commercial fishery points of view to the rest of the state. So yeah, you may be conflicted out of some of them under the current regulations, but there's a lot of fisheries across the state you would not be conflicted on, and that you would be able to bring your expertise on in forming regulatory development.
I think I'd be able to vote on Southeast issues, and that's about it.
Sport fisheries, subsistence fisheries. There's a whole there's a whole wide range of fisheries outside what you may have direct family involvement with. So
I also I think it's fairly common knowledge that in the past, I'm not a huge fan of rationalized fisheries. I tend to have a little bit of a negative view on it, but try to keep an open mind and realize that there are benefits to rationalization. Has your office considered or thought about the fact that we have a rationalized fishery in halibut and that it hasn't really protected, or the conservation perspective of that? We have low abundance right now. And that was like one of the major reasons for rationalization, was to protect and conserve that species.
let's take a look.
So I feel like that's a failure.
We got into rationalizing halibut fisheries because we were taking the entire quota within a 24-hour period. We could no longer stay within quota, manage that fishery responsibly. And it's just, we were announcing things and the people were going out irrespective of the weather and everything else. So it was as much of a management issue as it was anything else. The second thing is I'll take exception to the fact that the quota fishery is resulting in the current declines in biomass. I think if anything, that fishery, I've been quiet about this, but that fishery was, I think, largely mismanaged for a series of years. We basically have had declining size at age of halibut. And right now, the entire commercial fishery is prosecuted on primarily female halibut. That's not a sustainable model over time. Now, that's not because you had halibut quota shares. That's because we refused to look at the 32-inch size limit as a mechanism to deal with allowing some harvest of male halibut out in the ocean. So I take exception to the fact that you think that the quota share program led to the decline in halibut biomass. That was other factors that led to that. Now, some of the other issues about entry into fisheries, those are valid concerns.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. I guess my comment was based on the fact that that was supposed to be one of the benefits of a rationalized fishery, was that we would be able to better manage the fishery in a way that would protect the stocks and the biomass.
Well, we were overshooting quotas based on the length of our inability to control harvest during a short duration fishery. So that now is under control in terms of having the fishery not go over its quotas. We no longer go over quotas that often. The other thing is now we have halibut on the dock for consumers for almost 11 months a year. So that was another benefit. But you're right, there are significant drawbacks that we need to consider as we rationalize fisheries, including how you get entry into the fisheries.
I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll hold back and let others.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. We've had you on the hot seat long enough.
I think this is great.
No, we appreciate it. You should tell, just come to
Yeah,
Kodiak
yeah.
and talk fish.
No, I think this is
Um,
great.
Yeah, well, thank you so much again. We have about, 6-7 minutes before the next presentation.
Okay.
We'll be hearing from Ben Daly.
Okay,
So thanks again.
thank
We're
you
glad
all.
you're here.
thank you.
Yeah.